Darkness. In a cramped room, a kerosene wick flickered over a map spread across a wooden table, its edges curled from use. 3 fingers, smeared with dirt and sweat, pinned 3 points at once: a rail line, a communications relay, a fuel depot. Beside the table sat a local in mud-spattered coveralls, his eyes split between suspicion and need. "It's not about where we can hit," said a young man with a foreign accent and careful diction. "It's where we must hit. Here and here at the same time, 48 hours from now." An older local shook his head. "Our people are scattered. At the same time, how do we notify them? How do we know they'll all move? This isn't like lighting a fire." "That's why we need this." The young man nodded to his companion. A heavy leather case opened. Inside sat a radio with metal knobs and a telegraph key, plus a neatly coiled wire. The operator's hand rested on the key without pressing it, yet the room tightened as if the machine had weight beyond metal. "With this," the young man said, "we can make, at the same time, an order, not a hope. We can reach your friends in the northwest woods and the workers in the town to the southeast with 1 clock. We can call aircraft to drop explosives and weapons. We can close scattered fists into one." The local stared at the set, then at the 3 outsiders in plain clothes. 3 men. Only 3. "You think you can turn this place into a front line with that box?" the local asked. "The Germans have listening vans, direction-finding antennas. The moment that box speaks, what it brings might not be planes. It might be the secret police." "We know," the young man said. "Every transmission is a calculation. But if we never call, you stay scattered, cleared out one by one, or useless when timing matters. You remain an irritation, not real help." He traced the thick, dashed line marking the Allied advance. "Not help that makes this line move faster." Silence settled. Outside, a patrol engine rolled somewhere in the night, as ordinary as weather, and just as relentless. "This is a wager," the local said. "This is our work," the young man replied. They were built for this work, a 3-man node designed to survive, to speak, and to shape action through others. One of them could win trust and navigate local tongues and temperaments. One could keep a radio alive in mud, rain, and fear, and keep messages short enough to live. One could judge targets, teach sabotage, and turn anger into a plan. Alone, they were not an army. Together, if they could endure, they could make one. Now that node stood in an occupied land, trying to become a bridge. 2 nights earlier, they had dropped from an unmarked bomber into a black sky. In the cabin, no one spoke. There was only the steady thunder of engines and the shudder of the fuselage. They checked straps, checked hooks, checked the case that held their most dangerous tool. A red light came on. The hatch opened. Freezing wind and deafening noise poured in, and below was depthless blackness with the occasional pinprick of light villages under strict blackout. They could not see the ground, only ink that swallowed everything. The jumpmaster counted down with raised fingers. Green. The first man stepped into the void, swallowed instantly. The second followed, burdened with the heavy radio case. The third, the young liaison, paused for one last glance back into the cabin's dim light, then dove. Freefall was short, but sensation stretched. Wind screamed in the ears. The world rotated. Terror clamped the chest, and behind it, a thin thread of strange exhilaration, the sharp knowledge that the next seconds were the only ones that mattered. The parachute opening shock yanked hard. Noise dropped away. Now there was only the faint hiss of lines rubbing and the far-off mutter of engines fading into the clouds. They steered toward a drop zone that, on paper, had been an abstract symbol. On the ground, it was uneven field and brush, a patch of darkness among darker shapes. They landed hard, rolled, stripped harnesses. The first act was not to scan the horizon, but to listen. Their ears hunted every sound wind in treetops, distant dogs, and no engines, no shouted commands, no crunch of boots. For the moment, safe. They regrouped quickly. Training had built shared instinct. Parachutes were dragged into deep brush and buried. The radio case was opened, checked fast, intact. They changed into clothing better suited for movement and disposed of the jumpsuits the same way. Now they looked like three locals traveling at night, if you ignored the too alert light in their eyes. Using map and compass, they moved toward their first rendezvous point, an abandoned mill near the edge of the woods. The distance was short, but in darkness every meter carried risk. They avoided roads, crossed fields, waded a freezing stream. Their boots made no sound they could not explain. When they paused where they could melt into hedgerow and ditch. When they moved like people who had learned that motion itself could be evidence. The mill's outline emerged. Its water wheel was broken and still, no light. By agreement, they would wait until their contact arrived and the password was exchanged. Waiting dragged. Dew soaked their shoulders. Every leaf's shift tightened nerves. Would the contact come? Was he alive? Was he safe? Or was the arrangement itself a trap designed to gather them in one place? When anxiety began to chew through patience, a tiny cough rose from shadow on the far side of the mill. Natural, like an ordinary traveler clearing his throat. But the team caught it instantly. The young liaison rose slowly, not fully leaving cover, and in the local tongue whispered the first half of the password, an old proverb about weather meaningless on its face. Silence for a few seconds. Then a hoarse voice, equally low, supplied the second half. The password matched. A middle-aged man stepped out, hollow-cheeked, eyes sharp. He scanned all three men, lingering on the case. "Just the three of you?" he asked. "Just three. Proof." The young man produced an irregular fragment of a photograph. The stranger produced the other half. In the faint light, the pieces fit, edge to edge, forming a picture of a building corner. A token too specific to fake on the spot, issued long before, through channels that were supposed to be clean. The man examined the seam, then the image, then the three faces again. At last he nodded, loosening by a fraction. "Rayner," he said, "come with me. We can't stay here." He led them through thicker woods to a hunter's cabin. Inside waited a pale, wary woman. "Marta," Rayner said, "we don't have many people we can still reach. Some were arrested. Some hid deeper. Some are watching." He gestured to a crude table and straw pallets. "Safe for now, but not for long. Searches are frequent." No names were exchanged from the outsiders' side. No welcome was offered from the locals' side. This was not mistrust as insult. It was mistrust as armor. The cabin became a place where words were weighed because words could kill. The team listened, measured, asked for names and routines, for checkpoints and patrol intervals, for the places a message could move without killing the messenger. Rayner answered in fragments: a road where vans lingered, a village where a collaborator watched too closely, a branch rail line with regular patrol gaps. Marta watched them as if looking for the telltale softness of men who did not know what it meant to be searched at midnight. Then she asked the question that mattered most. "What can you actually do with that case?" They opened it without powering the set. The operator pointed to the key, the knobs, the wire, and spoke with a calm that was partly discipline and partly fear kept on a leash. Through the radio, they could reach the rear. They could request drops. They could pass out intelligence that might bring aircraft. They could receive a unified time and make scattered groups move on one clock. Rayner's gaze stayed on the metal. "How do you guarantee they won't hear you?" "We can't," the young man said. "We move often. We transmit briefly. We hide what we can. It's a gamble. But if we do not gamble, you remain scattered. They will eat you alive one small piece at a time." Before dawn, Rayner and Marta left with a next meeting point and a method. The cabin held only the three men. They needed to plant the first stake of credibility, one small proof that the rear connection was real. The radio operator connected a portable battery and put on headphones. For a moment he listened, eyes closed, as if hearing the forest itself. Then his fingers dropped to the key. Short, steady taps. A message compressed to the absolute minimum. The sound ended as quickly as it began, and he tore the set down at once. Wire coiled, case shut, traces erased. The cabin felt louder afterward, as if silence itself were listening. They did not stay anywhere for more than 2 nights. Cabin, barn, hunter's shed, graveyard hut. Meetings were brief and cautious. Rayner and Marta became a trembling bridge, leading them to 2 more local leaders with small groups still willing to act. Every contact point was disposable. Every handoff was tested. Every route was walked twice in the mind before being walked once in the dark. The answer from the rear did not come by radio, but by a dead-drop microfilm in a tree hollow. It confirmed a window for a first airdrop and listed what was coming: submachine guns, plastic explosive, detonators, batteries, medicine, and the small luxuries that kept bodies moving when fear was starving them. Choosing a drop zone was its own kind of operation. Open enough for parachutes, hidden enough to be away from German posts and main roads, close enough for quick hauling and faster disappearance. Rayner chose a place between 2 low hills, scrubby, with a dry riverbed nearby for cover. They walked it by day under different disguises and from different angles, and they named 3 withdrawal routes, because to have only one was to be captured. On the night, under low cloud and no moon, the team and 6 of Rayner's most reliable people lay still as stones until the signal window opened. The operator, now a signalman, lifted a blackout cloth and sent the coded flashlight pattern upward. The beam punched the clouds and died, punched again and died. Wind moved through scrub like distant voices. An engine note slid out of the clouds. Dark shapes fell. White shoots bloomed. They moved fast, cut lines, hauled crates into the riverbed, hid everything under thorn and stone, and dissolved back into separate hides. 15 minutes was the boundary between success and discovery. They stayed inside it. No cheering, only the same question hanging in the throat had anyone seen. German activity nearby did not spike. Luck, or the enemy's focus elsewhere, bought them time. They began splitting the supplies into dispersed caches, a cellar behind a false wall, waterproof boxes buried where only a certain tree and a certain rock could guide you back. They recorded what they could without creating a document that would be fatal if found. Custodians were assigned. Weapons became not symbols, but obligations. The map changed. Red crosses for German posts and blue circles for safe houses gained new symbols for depots and targets. The tone of meetings changed with it. Hope did not arrive as joy. It arrived as a kind of steady, practical hardness. The young liaison pressed a finger to the branch rail line. Blow track here and a train delays. But if you also hit the signal station, the delay becomes paralysis. Timing makes the damage bigger than the explosives. Pierre, a former railway worker, said his group could handle track. The signal station sat in Michel's area, with fewer hands and more caution. Then we synchronize, the young man said. We receive a unified time window, then pass the exact minute through couriers and dead drops. You do not need to know every detail of the other group's work. You need to know the clock is shared. The radio operator added the practical boundary. The radio was for the highest level traffic and supply calls. Day-to-day coordination would move by hands and feet. A live courier could be searched, but a courier could also choose silence and still walk away. A radio signal once sent could not be taken back. They tested the idea with a smaller action Pierre's cell cut and blasted a short section of track at an exact minute, while Michel's people struck the signal station within the same narrow window. The effect was not dramatic in sound, but dramatic in consequence. A German train halted and stayed halted. Repairs took longer than expected because the Germans were not sure whether the failure was mechanical, sabotage, or both. Patrols swarmed, then split, then swarmed again, chasing echoes of uncertainty. For the locals, the satisfaction felt different from a lone strike. It felt coordinated, as if their fear had been turned into geometry, and as if geometry itself had betrayed them. The response came quickly. Temporary checkpoints appeared on roads into villages near the strike. Searches hardened. Black cars of the secret police became a familiar threat. The pressure was not only in raids, but in the way ordinary errands became dangerous. A loaf of bread could be an alibi. A packet of tobacco could be a bribe. A wrong glance could be evidence. The three-man team tightened discipline. Meetings shortened. New dead drops replaced old ones. Passwords changed. They began insisting, again and again, on compartment each cell should know only what it must know. It protected the whole by limiting the damage of any one capture. But it also made the network harder to move, like a body forced to pass orders through numb hands. A young woman who carried messages between cells was stopped at a checkpoint. She had nothing on her, but nerves can be evidence. She was taken. 2 days passed without word. The safe room went cold. Reiner insisted she would not talk, but his voice lacked conviction because conviction did not protect the body that was being questioned. "We assume the worst," the military specialist said. "Any contact point she knows is burned. Anyone linked to her goes silent." Marta protested that explosives were stored at one of those points. "Then we abandon them," the young man said. "People matter more than supplies." They warned what they could, shifted routes, changed meeting places. When the messenger returned, battered and hollow-eyed, fear did not leave. No one could be sure her release was not a lure. Even if she spoke nothing, the Germans might follow her footsteps, watching which doors she looked at, which path she chose when the road forked. "We can't use her for core handoffs," Reiner said, and he said it like a death. Inside the three-man team, choices became sharper and more contested because the margin for error was shrinking. The radio became the center of argument. The operator wanted silence. Monitoring vans were active and the enemy had learned to hunt. The liaison wanted connection. Frontline timing mattered, and missing a major instruction could mean being irrelevant at the moment when relevance could save lives. "Every time we power it up, we may be broadcasting our coordinates," the operator insisted. "And every time we stay deaf, we risk drifting out of sync," the young man shot back. "Then we become pointless attrition." They compromised. Only the shortest, rarest transmissions. More listening than speaking, more movement. Each power-up felt like lifting a lamp in a forest where hunters had learned to look for light. On the air, the operator heard how crowded the night could be. Sometimes there was only hiss and crackle like wind trapped in a box. Sometimes a burst of coded traffic rose and fell too quickly to pass. And sometimes, in the wrong part of the dial, he caught German voices broken by static, a reminder that the enemy also lived in the invisible space, sending orders that ended in boots on a road. Each time he tuned and retuned, he felt as if he were leaning close to a wall and listening for footsteps on the other side. That pressure reached the locals in quieter ways. With weapons in hand, some wanted to strike anything German, any time. The team had to keep explaining that timing was a weapon, too. A random blast could satisfy anger and destroy morale when it drew reprisals without gain. The military specialist had to be blunt. A pointless explosion did not prove courage. It proved that the enemy's system of fear still controlled the schedule. Arguments flared over distribution. Who received a submachine gun first, Pierre's trackmen or Michel's signal team? Who received the plastic explosive, the town group or the rural cell? Any decision could be read as favoritism. And resentment was a leak as dangerous as a radio signal. The liaison learned to speak in terms of tasks, not merits. The man who guarded a cache this week might carry a charge next week. The person who received less this week might receive more next week. A network survived on moving burdens as carefully as it moved weapons. Meanwhile, the net grew, not larger in a clean sense, but denser. More people wanted to act. More people wanted weapons. More people wanted to believe. The three men found themselves teaching as often as they planned how to place charges, how to cut a line and vanish, how to watch a street without looking like you were watching, how to build a small lie that could survive questioning. They repeated until it sounded like prayer. The rule of compartment. Know only what you must. Do not ask for what you do not need. Do not volunteer names. Do not let pride turn into confession. A network survived by learning to be forgettable. "We're walking while carrying a bucket of water on a single hair," the military specialist muttered during one exhausted move, half joke and half confession. "But if the water spills in the right place," the liaison answered, eyes bloodshot, "it can put out an entire fire." Then the alignment order arrived, urgent and brief, as if the rear had no patience left for their caution. 48 hours. 3 targets in far separated zones: a mainline rail bridge, a regional telephone exchange, a fuel depot. The start time was precise to the minute. The wording was blunt, crucial: do everything possible, at any cost. Rayner repeated the phrase softly, as if tasting its weight. Pierre stared at the map and said what all of them were thinking. 48 hours was barely time to move a message, let alone prepare 3 operations under occupation. "It's an order," the young liaison said. "If they issued it, the front needs it. We do it." They split the work. The liaison and the military specialist went to finalize plans with the groups in their zones. The operator held at a central concealed point to confirm timing if he dared, and to send a result signal if he could. They agreed on crude backup visual signals, smoke by day, a controlled flash by night, because sometimes the only safe message was the one that did not ride the air. The next day and a half blurred into motion footpaths, fields, whispered meetings, fingers tracing routes on paper, arguments reduced to decisions, charges distributed, roles assigned, withdrawal routes memorized, Plan B agreed in a sentence. On the bridge, sentries were counted and shift changes noted. In town, Marta rehearsed ways to move through streets without looking like a group, one at a time, different corners, separate exits. At the fuel depot, the local cell weighed the problem of distance they had to reach it, plant charges, and withdraw before the first alarm drew reinforcements. They rehearsed routes in their heads until the paths felt like scars. Sleep came in fragments. Food tasted like nothing. Every knock of a loose branch against a trunk sounded like a warning. The team's strength, such as it was, lay in refusing panic. Panic was loud. Panic was contagious. Messages moved at the speed of legs. A courier left one farm before dawn, crossed fields where frost made footprints visible, hid in a hedgerow when a motor passed, and reached a second farm by mid-morning to pass a phrase that sounded like a shopping list but carried a time and a place. From there, the phrase went onward. Every transfer was a point of failure, and every point of failure demanded that fewer people know and know less. By the last day, the schedule existed as fragments scattered across different minds, held together by trust that had been purchased in small risks and small proofs. In those 48 hours, they also fought a subtler enemy doubt inside the network. People who had spoken boldly in a safe room became quiet when the hour came to walk past a checkpoint. People who wanted to be heroes discovered that heroism without discipline did not survive first contact. The military specialist forced each group to say the same thing out loud: what they would do if the first plan failed, and how they would pull away without trying to rescue equipment at the cost of bodies. He made them practice leaving. Leaving was the hardest part for a mind that wanted victory to be dramatic. On the night before the action, the 3 men met once in the woods. No speeches. Just a hard clasp of hands, a glance that tried to cover what words could not. "Our job isn't to blow the targets ourselves," the liaison said. "It's to keep the clock accurate." Action day came under an overcast sky. Time crawled in anxious ticks. The radio operator hid in a rock cleft with a view of distant landmarks. He watched his wristwatch, each second tick a nail. He powered the set to warm it, fingers poised to send the agreed short ready code. He listened first, because listening was the only way to know whether the band was crowded with the enemy. He hesitated. German vehicle movement below seemed heavier than usual. A professional alarm climbed his spine. Maybe it was ordinary. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the Germans sensing without proof that something had shifted. He shut the set down and went silent. Trust the group's watches. Trust the backup signals. Do not light the beacon. The minute arrived. From the bridge direction came a dull boom that rolled through hills. Smoke rose, thickening in the low sky. 10 minutes later, the town's lights flickered into chaos, then small points of fire. The exchange. The fuel depot remained quiet long enough to turn the operator's stomach. until the horizon flared and a black column climbed into the sky, rolling and spreading. The blast wave arrived late, low thunder across the ground. 3 targets struck. Whatever the exact damage, it was loud enough for the occupiers to hear, and visible enough for them to chase. The operator packed and moved before satisfaction could form. Engines thickened on the roads. Alarms rose. The purge was coming. In that moment, survival became not bravery, but discipline. Leave no trace. Take no unnecessary road. Do not return to a place just because you wished it was safe. The following days were black. Villages were encircled. Men were rounded up. Homes were searched with the cold thoroughness of people who had learned that cruelty was efficient. Occupation broadcasts promised rewards and threatened punishment, and in that mix of fear and money, collaborators gained courage. The network took heavy damage. Pierre's group ran into a patrol while withdrawing from the bridge site. There was a short exchange of fire. 2 were killed. André was captured. The town group destroyed the exchange and mostly escaped, but Marta became separated in the chaos and did not return. The fuel depot cell went silent. Whether they were dead, hiding, or compromised, no one could tell. The central hide was burned and replaced. After grueling detours and careful loops, the 3 men regrouped at a new forest camp, scraped and exhausted, each carrying the same thought: the net had held long enough to bite, and now the enemy would tear at every strand. 2 dead, 1 captured, the specialist said, voice raw. Marta didn't make it back, the liaison said, face smudged with soot. The operator reported, I stayed silent. No confirmation sent, but I saw fire or blasts at all 3 points. No one blamed him. In that hour, the radio might have been a death sentence for all of them. The sacrifice had already been made. The only question was whether additional sacrifice would be forced by a signal that added nothing. They tried to reconnect through the few channels not yet exposed. Replies were thin. Fear reclaimed the edges of the net. Some people vanished on purpose, because being alive and silent was better than being brave and dead. Some vanished because they had been taken. The map inside their heads grew emptier. The work changed from organizing to surviving, from building a net to keeping the last strands from snapping. Days later, a fragment of news came in from nearer the front. An Allied offensive had begun on schedule, and on a flank, German reserves had suffered an unexpected delay and confusion in communications coordination. The breakthrough had been easier than anticipated. No mention of sabotage. No names. A single sentence in a broad report. Rainer listened, then looked through thin sunlight in the trees. So, our people bought them easier. It may have meant fewer died, the liaison said, and hated how abstract it sounded. It changed the friction. Rainer nodded, not agreeing or refusing, only carrying the familiar war bewilderment sacrifice measured in faces, results measured in a line of text. From then on, large synchronized strikes became rare. The network needed time to heal, to rebuild trust, to find new couriers and safer rhythms. They shifted toward quieter intelligence collection and limited training, enough to keep skills alive without drawing the enemy's attention. The radio tapped less often, each time heavier with memory. Every use demanded a calculation that no longer felt mathematical and more like a moral debt. Time moved under occupation's shadow. Seasons turned. Sometimes artillery could be heard far away, the earth trembling faintly, and those tremors sounded like a promise and a threat at once. Then, one summer, the constant pressure began to loosen. German forces started to pull back, order frayed. News spread by whispered mouths, and secretly opened radios landings, advances, collapse near. The transition felt unreal. People emerged blinking into sunlight that hurt. Some resistance members wanted to celebrate. Others could not, because celebration required believing the dead could be repaid. The surviving cells helped guide Allied patrols, pointed out remaining posts, and tried to keep revenge from turning into chaos. Officers offered brief praise and turned back to larger maps, because larger maps were what wars taught men to see. When the occupation finally ended, the underground front did not end with a ceremony. It dissolved into victory noise. Some people went home and tried to become ordinary again. Some found that the war had changed the shape of their lives too much for ordinary to fit. Some faced new dangers because new powers always asked new questions. The three-man team turned in their radio and exchanged plain clothes for uniforms that no longer fit quite right. Debriefing was brief. Orders sent them to an assembly point. Home, or the next assignment, would be decided later. The fact that they were alive felt like a kind of mistake the war had not yet noticed. On the evening before leaving, the young liaison went alone to the abandoned mill where he had first met Rainer. The mill was more broken now, the water wheel filmed with green moss. Rainer waited in the same place, more bent, eyes dulled by years of strain. "Leaving?" Rainer asked. "Yes." Orders came down. They stood in the wind, moving through broken wood. A long silence passed, the kind that contains everything both men were refusing to say. "Martyr," the young man said. "Any word?" Rainer shook his head. "No. Many people have no word. Maybe they died where no one will ever know. Maybe they changed names and went elsewhere." He paused. "But what you did, the supplies, the timing, kept people alive and made people feel they weren't dying for nothing. That matters." The young man wanted to answer with something clean and certain, the way orders sounded clean and certain on paper. He could not. Rainer pulled a small cloth bundle from his coat. Inside was the young man's half of the old photo fragment, the piece that had once proven identity. "I don't need it," he said, "but you can remember." The young man held the cold strip of worn-edged film. It proved nothing now. It was only the wreckage of a fragile connection that had once held, and a reminder that the strongest things in that war had often been made of paper and trust. They shook hands. No more words. Then they turned and walked in opposite directions, the mill's shadow stretching long in the late light. On the ship home, the young man stood on deck and watched the coastline recede. Waves slapped the hull in steady rhythm. In the wind and sudden silences, he could still hear the tapping sometimes, brief, steady, and dangerous, the sound that had linked distant orders to death close enough to touch, and linked scattered courage to the same minute.